Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we will be carrying out a full review of the recently released Just Flight Turbo Arrow 3 and 4. Hopefully some of you will already have seen my preview of the product. Heads up, it's a really excellent product from Just Flight and I really enjoyed my flight out previously in the aircraft. But in today's video, as usual, we're going to be a little bit more thorough, pick our way around the aircraft a little bit more closely, and cover some of the areas that we didn't cover in the previous video. As you can see, for today's flight we'll be focusing on the Turbo Arrow 4, primarily as it's something a little bit different from the Arrow 3 that we featured previously. We're currently on the ground at Austria's Salzburg airport, and we're going to be taking the aircraft over the Alps in towards Graz airport. I picked the routing for a couple of reasons. One, Airlink are an Austrian-based aircraft charter company, and two, I thought by flying over the Alps that would give us a really good opportunity to put the Turbo Arrow through its paces. As usual, we'll first take a look at the external model of the aircraft before heading inside to do the same thing. We'll briefly run through the EFB functionality, and then we'll get the aircraft started up using the full real-world checklists. We'll depart out of Salzburg, heading out towards the southeast towards Graz. Once we're comfortably established in the cruise, we'll head outside the aircraft and take a little bit more of a look at the external model, hopefully take in some of the stunning scenery en route as well from the Austrian Alps. We'll then come back to the cockpit as we descend into Graz. We'll carry out a full landing and shutdown. Finally, we'll carry out a few manoeuvres in the aircraft, so for example a stall. We'll try and get the aircraft to spin just to get more of a feel for the flight model at the edges of the flight envelope. And then to wrap up the review, I'll give you my overall thoughts on the Just Flight Turbo Arrow 3 and 4. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video and find it to be of use. If you do, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below. But now we'll continue with our external walk around of the aircraft and get a bit more of a feel for the modelling and the texturing. So as you can see, overall once again Just Flight have done a really nice job with the modelling of the Turbo Arrow 4. The same goes for the Turbo Arrow 3. Obviously there's not a huge difference between this aircraft and their previous iteration of the Arrow, but again the quality is certainly there. All of the proportions look to be correct and accurate, and really from just about every angle the Arrow 4 in particular looks rather nice. As one would expect, the modelling detail of the aircraft is really high even in the more hidden away areas such as the wheel well bay. Really the modelling throughout the aircraft in all of the important areas is rather flawless. The cockpit looks very nice from the outside, it looks even nicer from the inside as you'll see in just a moment's time. My only real gripe with the Turbo Arrow externally, and we saw the same on the previous iteration of the Arrow, as you can see some of the external texturing is a little bit lower resolution than we've seen from other developers, noticeably so when we get close up to the aircraft. Overall though, once again Just Flight have done a really nice job with the Turbo Arrow 3 and 4. As far as the external model of the aircraft goes, it's really excellent, and the textures, whilst they are a little bit low resolution in some areas, still look really nice. Overall the aircraft looks visually to be very realistic, and I think personally that Just Flight have struck a really nice balance between the aircraft looking worn and used, but also still looking well kept. In terms of aircraft liveries, you do get a fairly decent selection based on various airframes throughout the world. I think from memory it was around 5 or 6 liveries per variant of aircraft. My only real gripe, and again it was the same with the previous iteration of the Arrow, I would love to see the option to have our own personalised registrations on all of the available liveries and not just one. I think most of us have now become used to having the ability to set a custom registration within Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's obviously a fairly minor niggle, but for me I do like being able to set my own personalised registration. And so again it would be nice to have an option to have a custom registration on all the available liveries. Anyway, that just about covers the external modelling and texturing of the aircraft. Let's now head into the cockpit and we'll take a little bit of a closer look at the modelling and the texturing in there. So now in the cockpit of the Turbo Arrow 4, and as you might expect the cockpit looks very familiar again compared with the Arrow 3. That's certainly not a complaint though, the Arrow 3's cockpit was one of the best that we've seen in the sim to date. And it's really nice to see that Just Flight did still put in the work and go to the effort of making the cockpit aesthetically look a little bit different. And again we have the option to select between various different avionics suites. The first available option that you can see here is a Garmin GNS 530 coupled with a Garmin GNS 430. Next we have a single Garmin GNS 530 coupled with a more traditional radio stack. And lastly, in this particular video we have a traditional radio stack coupled with a Garmin GPS 100 unit. The aircraft does also come with the option to switch out for the recently released PMS GTN 750 mod. The mod looks really great with a whole host of extra functionality, but I haven't had a chance to try it myself yet. Anyway, overall, as I say, the modelling in the cockpit really rather excellent, and the texturing really nice as well. Again, everything looks appropriately worn, appropriately coloured, and the texturing inside is very crisp and very clean throughout, much more so than we saw with some of the areas of the external model. Some of the more hidden away areas of the internal model are a little bit more basic than some of the other aircraft that we've seen come into the sim recently. That being said, the level of detail is still more than acceptable, and it doesn't personally bother me too much whether the more hidden away areas are given less attention. The aircraft cabin also done very nicely, as you can see. I would say that again, whilst the texturing is not perhaps quite as high definition as you might see on something like a Carenado aircraft, overall I do think that the texturing and the colorization looks a lot more realistic. Lastly, the cockpit lighting. As you would expect from the real aircraft, the options are fairly basic, but they certainly do the job. And overall again, I think that the colouring from the lighting gives a really nice ambience. Anyway, next stop we'll now take a look at the custom Just Flight tablet. So once again, the aircraft comes with the Just Flight Custom EFB. This is very similar, if not identical, to the version that we had with their previous iteration of the Arrow 3. However, just to run through things for those who aren't familiar, we'll briefly cover the functionality of the tablet now. So the first section we have is the aircraft states. We can select various aircraft states there. Very useful if you are unfamiliar with the aircraft or you want to get up in the air in a bit of a hurry. We have ready for takeoff, ready for start, and cold and dark. Next we have maintenance functionalities for the aircraft. So for example, we can refill our oil quantity. This is very important as the aircraft does suffer potential failure if you fail to maintain it properly. Similarly, we have our battery voltage. The battery can indeed drain, and it will indeed run flat. Lastly, we have warnings relating to the maintenance status of the aircraft. So for example, at the moment, as you can see, we need to prime the engine before we can start it. Below that, we have an option to disable or enable the model of the co-pilot in the virtual cockpit. Next, we have our aircraft options. So we have an auto fuel selector option. Briefly, basically that will auto-select between the two fuel tanks during flight. This means if you do want to do a longer flight and you want to go away from the computer for some time, you don't have to come back and worry about having a fuel imbalance. Next we have the option to switch out the various avionics setups which we've covered previously. We have state saving. The aircraft does have a persistent state option, which means basically if you set the aircraft up in one way and leave it and come back at a later date to the sim, the aircraft should be exactly the same as when you left it. This means you do have to be much more particular with how you operate the aircraft, as leaving the aircraft in an undesirable state could have negative consequences during your next flight. Below that we have an option to select between a HSI or a directional gyro. Then we have the ability to turn off the left and the right yoke. We can either use these toggles or we can just click on the yokes themselves. After that we have our various aircraft equipment options. So as you would have seen from the outside views, we have chocks and tie downs, as well as a tow bar which we didn't cover here. Again, you can tick these on and off, and again you do have to be careful. If you leave the chocks or the tie downs in, then you'll find that you are unable to move the aircraft until they have been removed. Below that we have the options for the aircraft doors. You've already seen the cabin and the baggage door. We also have the option to open and close the oil filler door on the engine cowling. Lastly, we have a basic flight computer. Again, various options there that we covered during the previous review of the Arrow 3, but I'll just cycle through those now so that you can see what options are available. And lastly, if you're anything like me and you'd rather not see too many LCD screens in your cockpit, you can turn the EFB on and off very easily just by hitting the intercom toggle switch. Anyway, that covers all the options for the custom Just Flight EFB. We'll now carry on with the review. We'll get ourselves sat down and we'll get the aircraft started up. So we are now sat down and comfortable in the cockpit of the Turbo Arrow 4. For those of you who are regular viewers to the channel, you may have seen me start up the Arrow one too many times now, but for the sake of accuracy and completeness of the review, we'll be working our way through all of the relevant checklists as usual. So the before start checklist, the pre-flight inspection has been completed, passenger briefing is not required, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure, circuit breakers are checked in, and worth noting that the circuit breakers do actually work. Avionics, are off, landing gear lever is down, brakes are tested and set, and the fuel tank will initially come onto the left tank for the start. Just before we run through the start checklist, we'll get the cockpit door closed up, and making sure that's secure. So the start checklist, the mixture is in the idle cutoff position, propeller is in the high RPM position, throttle will open about 1/4 of an inch, beacon can come on, as can the master switch, mixture can go to fully rich, and we'll prime the engine until we see a rise in fuel flow, which we now have. So we'll disengage primer, we'll bring the mixture back to idle cutoff, checking that the prop area is clear, which it is. Clear prop! I'm going to engage the starter. I find that sometimes you do need a little bit of mixture just to get the engine turning over. And we have a good start, so bring the mixture all the way up to the fully rich position. Just bring the throttle up slightly to get the engine to tick over nicely, and then back to 1000 RPM. So really nice to see there that the engine's a bit hesitant to catch. That's pretty realistic, much more so than many of the other aircraft that we've seen in the sim. Oil pressure has come up into the green. We'll leave the mixture in the full rich position. Load meter, we're showing around 20 amps there, so that's within limits. Flaps are retracted. Avionics can come on. So we'll turn our GNS 530 on, we'll leave COM2 and nav2 off for now. Turn the DME on just in case we need that. Transponder can go to standby. Heading indicator, we're showing a heading of 155 or thereabouts. And the same on the compass. Altimeters, so we'll tune up the HOTAS, see what the weather's doing, see which runway they're using currently at Salzburg.
Salzburg Airport information, Charlie 0600 Zulu. Wind 268 at 8. Visibility 6. Sky condition 1,100 feet scattered, 5,000 feet scattered. Temperature 12. Dew point 13. QNH 29.902. Visual runway 33 in use. Landing and departing runway 33. DSR aircraft, say direction of flight. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact. You have Charlie.
Okay, so using runway 33 with the wind out from the west, we've already got the Reverb WMR alpha departure set up in the GNS 530 for runway 33. Altimeters are set, and we'll call now for a taxi. It'll be a departure out to the east.
Salzburg ground, Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, request taxi for east departure with Charlie.
Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra taxi to and hold short of runway 33 via taxiway Alpha. Contact tower on 118.1 when ready.
Taxiing hold short runway 33 via taxiway Alpha, Piper Tango Bravo Sierra.
Okay, so park brake can come off. We are clear on the right. We'll exit the apron just off the left wing, and then we'll turn right onto the main taxiway for runway 33. Unfortunately, from our present position, it would be a bit of a tight takeoff from the intersection for runway 33, so we'll backtrack down the taxiway a little bit just to give us more of a takeoff run. And we're all clear on the left. So we'll take not the next intersection on the left, but the one thereafter. As we're taxiing out, we'll brief the departure, so it will be the Reverb WMR alpha departure, as I mentioned, off runway 33, which is initially tracking on a heading of 335, which we have set on the HSI, out towards waypoint Whiskey Sierra 610. Will then be a right turn out towards waypoint Whiskey Sierra 626, and then on out towards 627, and eventually tracking out towards the south towards waypoint Verda. Altitude restriction on the departure, we need to be above 10,000 feet at waypoint Werder, and initial max speed for the turn is 165 knots, which of course is no problem for us. Plenty of high terrain around, as you can quite clearly see. The MSA for the departure is 11,000 feet. Anyway, as I say, we'll take the next intersection on the left. The wind's out from the west, so we'll swing the aircraft around, get it pointed into wind for the run-up. And again, the Arrow 3 and 4, the Turbo Arrow variants, very nice to taxi, very easy to taxi, and very smooth, very pleasant. So that puts us into wind. We'll just roll forward to get the nose wheel straight. Part brake can come on. And again, bring the throttle to idle around 1000 RPM. So for the run up, the nose wheel is straight, the brakes are set and holding. Flight controls. Are full free and in the correct sense. Fuel selector valve can go onto the right tank now. We'll make sure that's feeding correctly as well. Mixture is fully rich. Throttle will come up to 2000 RPM for the mag check. Okay, it says 2000 RPM. We'll check the left magneto first. There's about a 75 RPM drop on the left, back to both. And checking the right. And it's the same on the right. And back to both. Just wait for the RPM to stabilise again, then we'll check the prop. So propeller has been cycled, engine instruments are all in the green. Annunciator panel, there's no annunciators there, we'll just test that. That is checked. Suction, we are showing just below 5 there, so that's within limits. And we'll come back to idle. Idling around 650 RPM, so that's good. Back up to 1000. And continuing with the checklist, the throttle friction lock has been adjusted. Communications radios are set. Flight instruments, set the heading bug for runway 33. And the flight instruments are checked. Fuel quantities, we've got about 30 US gallons in each main tank at the moment, as you can see, and the tanks are balanced. Elevator and rudder trim is set for takeoff. Autopilot not required. Flaps are up. It'll be a flaps up takeoff. We've got plenty of runway now. Cabin doors and windows are closed. Seats are adjusted and locked. For the departure briefing, so it's runway 33, it'll be a Werder 1 Alpha departure, which, as we said, straight ahead initially and then a right turn. Climbing up to above 10,000 feet by waypoint Werder. Rotate speed will be 70 knots, and we'll be climbing at the speed of 100 knots. Once we have a positive climb, we'll get the gear up. And the MSA, once again, on the departure is 11,000 feet. So we'll swing ourselves around again to the holding point, and we'll call for a takeoff clearance. Park brake can come off. Plenty of room to swing around to the left, so we'll do that. Just using a little bit of left brake to tighten up the turn. And just coming to a stop before the holding point. Park brake can go back on. Back up to 1000 RPM, we'll call the tower, request a takeoff clearance.
Salzburg Tower Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra ready for east departure at runway tree.
Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra QNH 29.902 and 268 at 8. Departure to the east approved. Cleared for takeoff runway tree.
Cleared for takeoff runway tree, Piper Tango Bravo Sierra.
Okay, so we are cleared for takeoff. The lights can come on, as can the pitot heats. Fuel pump can go to low. Transponder can go to out. And we'll note down the time. It's 2.3, so we'll call it 2.4 on the flight plan. Part brake can come off. It's clear on final. And all clear up wind as well. So we'll just get ourselves taxied into position. We'll hold momentarily just so that you can have a listen to the external sounds from the aircraft. And runway 33 is confirmed on the compass and on the HSI. So we are all set and ready for the departure. Feet can come off the brakes. We'll come up to 40 inches on the manifold pressure for the takeoff. So power is set, RPM is checked, T's and P's are in the green. Overall the rudder response is reasonable, still got that slightly overly sensitive Microsoft Flight Simulator feel to it. 370 knots coming back on the yoke. The aircraft does feel pretty nose heavy. I've got about 2/3 full deflection on my yoke at the moment to get the nose up. We'll pitch for around 100 knots, positive climb, we'll get the gear up. And having to use quite a bit of right rudder to keep the ball centred there. I've got about 1/4 of full deflection right rudder at the moment.
Piper Tango Bravo Sierra continue for east departure.
Salzburg Tower Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra continue for east departure.
Okay, that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. We've got 0.5 of a mile to run to the next waypoint and then we'll turn out towards the northeast. So coming down to a heading of 033, we'll set up the CDI and the same for the heading bug. We'll climb using full power. I'm not sure how accurate that is to the real world aircraft, but the Just Flight Manual doesn't mention anything about reducing the power for the climb, and it'll help us get above these cloud layers as quickly as possible, and also of course to clear the terrain. So good on the heading. Still continuing to trim the aircraft just to ease off on the elevator forces. And coming up through 3,000 feet now, so we'll slowly start reducing that mixture, keeping a good eye on the EGT. Clear of the terrain for now, so we'll get the fuel pump off, and the landing light can come off as well.
Leaving my airspace, frequency change approved.
Salzburg Tower Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra frequency change.
Okay, so we'll tune up Salzburg approach, that's 13246. And we'll request a flight following from him. Obviously, usually this would all be done in IFR, but again, the Sims ATC isn't up to much, so we'll just use the flight following.
Salzburg approach Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra is type Piper
squawk 0511.
Piper Tango Bravo Sierra radar contact 5 miles north of Salzburg, 5,300 feet. UNH 29.902.
Roger, Piper Tango Bravo Sierra.
So she now has this radar identified, the altimeters are set. 3 miles to run to Whiskey Sierra 626, then we can turn out towards the east. And as you can see, the aircraft performing very nicely here with 40 inches manifold pressure and max RPM. We're doing about 1400 feet a minute rate of climb. Overall, the aircraft is very pleasant to hand fly. It's a little bit heavier than some of the other aircraft that you will have flown in the sim, but that's certainly to its credit. Still got the right rudder in at the moment, and the aircraft feeling a little bit left wing heavy as well, so having to use a little bit of right aileron just to keep us straight and level. Overall, I have to say I really like the Turbo Arrow from Just Flight. I think it has all of the benefits of the Arrow with a whole lot more capability. As you can see, we're climbing very nicely, and you'll see later on we'll do a very nice cruise speed as well over towards Graz. And really, the aircraft's just absolutely excellent. We'll of course discuss more during the conclusion of the video, but I would say it's probably the best aircraft currently available in the sim. A real joy to fly, very immersive as well. So another 3 miles to Whiskey Sierra 627, and then we'll turn out towards the south towards waypoint Werder. As we mentioned, we need to be above 10,000 feet at Werder. As you can see, we're just coming up from 10,000 feet now. So absolutely no issues there. And another thing that's well worth mentioning with the Arrow, you can actually overboost the engine and indeed damage it, ultimately leading to a failure, so you do have to keep a good eye on the manifold pressure and make sure you don't overboost the engine. Anyway, just come up through 10,000 feet now. Obviously we'd be starting to think about oxygen at this point, but not going to be an issue for us virtually today. We'll assume that we have donned our virtual oxygen masks or catheters. Another mile to run till the next waypoint. Still doing about 1,200 feet a minute rate of climb at the moment. We'll keep coming back on that mixture. And now turning out to the south towards waypoint Werder. Looking for a track of 167. So again, we'll set the CDI. And the heading bug. So just continuing around onto our heading, you can see we're slightly out to the left of track. I did press the button there, but it obviously didn't recognise that. So 1244 for Vienna. And just coming up on 1,000 feet to go. Looks like we should be able to level off below the cloud base, so that's great.
Vienna Center, Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, 12,100 feet.
Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra, Vienna Center, QNH 29.902, continue to Graz as planned.
yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. Continue out towards waypoint Werder. And just edging up towards 13,000 feet. So letting the aircraft settle down into the cruise attitude. We'll start trimming accordingly for that. And as the speed builds up, we can slowly reduce the pressure on the rudder pedals. Just keeping that ball centered. We'll center up the heading bug. And just having to use a little bit of right rudder trim here just to ease off on that left wing down tendency. So the aircraft trimmed pretty reasonably now. We'll get the autopilot in. And just clicking on the Piper logo there to give us an out hold. For the cruise, we'll come back to around 35 inches on the manifold pressure. And about 2400 RPM. Try and make it a nice quick cruise over towards Graz. See, we're currently doing a ground speed of 133 knots. We'll lean the engine out. So that looks to be about the peak. We're just reaching up slightly from that. Looks to be about right. And we'll now maintain the cruise with the autopilot in. We'll let the speed build up. As you can see, we're doing 144 knots ground speed now, 145. So again, a really nice, decent cruising speed with really excellent altitude capabilities in the Turbo Arrow. Anyway, we'll now head outside the aircraft. We'll take a look at some of the external modelling once again, and indeed some of the external scenery as we make our way south down through the Alps. And I'll come back to you again just before we reach the top of descent into Graz. So welcome back to the cockpit. As you can see, the Turbo Arrow had absolutely no issues cruising its way over the Alps. We managed to maintain a speed of around 155 knots in the cruise, very easily maintaining 13,000 feet. As you can see, we've just started our descent. We're currently descending down to an altitude of 8,000 feet. and we have to maintain that until we pass the next waypoint, which is Whiskey Golf 821. After that we can descend down to 7,500 feet or 6,800 depending on where we are in the sector MSA. Anyway, we're pretty close to the airfield now, so we'll cancel our flight following.
Salzburg approach Piper Tango Bravo Sierra, cancel flight following.
Piper Tango Bravo Sierra Deltweg approach cancellation received. Squawk 7000. Frequency change approved.
Okay, so we're squawking 7,000. Back to out. And we'll tune up Graz now. So we'll call the tower 1182. Requesting a full stop landing.
Graz Tower Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra is 22 miles northwest 11,200 feet with Alpha to land.
Piper Golf, India Tango Bravo Sierra Graz Tower. QNH 29.902 and 267 and 8. Enter right downwind runway 34 center.
Make right downwind runway 34 center, Piper Tango Bravo Sierra.
Okay, so he wants us on runway 34 centre, which is fine. We'll just continue to track south towards waypoint Z-bar, and then we'll peel off for a visual approach onto runway 34. Just going back through 10,000 feet shortly. So again, we'll be getting back down to levels where we're not going to need supplementary oxygen anymore. And as we're tracking out towards waypoint Z-bar, we can now descend down to an altitude of 7,500 feet. But we're visually clear with the terrain now, so we'll descend visually. As I say, we'll take up a visual entry onto runway 34. And runway 34, there's plenty of runway for us to land. That means we're going to be vacating off to the right to the parking area. As you can see, the aircraft doing an absolutely fine job of tracking. We're currently in nav mode at the moment, just tracking the GPS flight plan. And 10,000 feet, that means we've got 9,000 feet to lose. We've got about 8 minutes to run to Z-bar. So we'll just come off the power slightly more. Just increase that vertical speed. And we'll keep increasing that mixture as we descend. Coming through 10,000 feet, so the landing light can come on. And we'll carry out the descent checklist. So the ASUS will obtain that now. Looking for a frequency of 12613. We can see visually, of course, that the weather's going to be fairly nice there. We've already got the wind from tower. Okay, so the wind's out from the west as per the tower. Overall though, pretty nice. A little bit of low cloud around, so we'll have to work our way through that. Anyway, continuing with the checklist, we do have the ASUS. Altimeters are set. Passenger briefing is not required. Mixture we are adjusting as we descend. Same for the throttle and the propeller. Landing light is on. and fuel selector. It says fullest tank. We'll come back onto the right. We've been feeding off the left for quite some time now. So fuel pump can go to low. Switching back over to the right tank. And fuel pressure is good. And we'll stay on the right for the landing. So as I say, we can descend down to 7,500 feet on the approach. As long as we're visual, we can descend further. Just weave our way through the clouds as we approach the airport. You can see that the field is just out somewhere at our 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock currently. Can't quite make it out at the moment with this bank of cloud just in front of us. There's a nice little gap for us between the clouds on the left and the right. We'll take the gap out to the right just to give us a little bit more time to descend. And now that I've got the aircraft trimmed off as we had it in the cruise, it's even more pleasant to fly. It's just so responsive on the controls. I noticed quite a few people still saying with the previous iteration of the Arrow 3 that they find the aircraft overly sensitive. Personally, I don't really seem to have that issue in the sim. I don't know if that's a control setup issue or a hardware issue, but I find the aircraft very pleasant to fly. You do need reasonable amounts of control input to get the aircraft to respond. Anyway, 4,500 feet, so another 3,500 feet to lose. We'll do the downwind checks. So brakes are checked and off. Undercarriage will hold for now. Mixture, put that to fully rich now. Fuel pump can go to low. And the fuel quantities, we've got about 20 US gallons in each tank, so plenty of fuel. And the tanks are balanced. Instruments are checked. Landing light is on, harness is secure. Now we'll just come around the back of this little wisp of cloud here. There we are, cleared to land. We're just letting the speed come back. We'll take the gear down. And we'll start a turn onto our base leg. We'll slow up some more, we'll start taking some flap as well. Overall the profile not looking too bad at the moment. And visually checking, we are all clear on final. We'll take a stage of flap. So you can quite clearly see runway 34 centre, that's the big tarmac runway. And as you can see, the apron is out to the right. We'll land a little bit long, I think, just so that we don't have to roll through too far for the runway exits. Take another stage of flap. And we'll go full flaps now. We're a little bit high, as you can see, on the PAPI, but we'll lose that altitude, no issue. Get the speed back to around 75 knots. And pitch can go to fully fine. So pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down, we have 3 greens. Flaps are set, landing clearance has been received, the runway is clear. Looks like there's a little bit of a go-karting track or something just down at our 11 o'clock. And again, we are a little bit high at the moment, but that's fine. We do want to land a little bit long. Aircraft feels very reasonable as well in the approach configuration. A little bit heavier now on the controls. Very stable overall, as you can see. And you can see from the windsock we do have a slight wind out from the west, as per the ASUS. So slowly coming back on the throttle. We'll try and grease it on as we've got plenty of distance here. Yeah, pretty good. So easing the nose wheel down onto the runway. And again, overall the rudder response not too bad. I think it's still a little bit more sensitive. But that could be a hardware issue as well, to be fair. Anyway, we'll vacate to the next right. Slowing the aircraft down. Braking feels good overall, they're not too aggressive. Pretty much what you'd expect.
Piper Tango Bravo Sierra contact ground on 118.2.
118.2 Piper Tango Bravo Sierra.
So as usual, we won't call ground, we'll just head for the GA apron ourselves. So landing light and pitot heat are off, transponder is off, flaps are up. Just get ourselves onto the taxiway and then we'll carry out the after landing checks. We'll follow the marshaller into the bay off at our 1 o'clock. So the after landing checks, wing flaps are up, mixture is set, fuel pump can come off, landing light is off, transponder is off, and taxi clearance has been received. That's the after landing checklist complete. Not sure why the marshaller wants us out to the right there at the moment, we're pretty much on the line. So we'll ease our way forward. And bring the aircraft to a stop. Park brake on, throttle back up to 1000 RPM. And the securing checklist, avionics. Are off, throttle is set, mixture can come back to idle cutoff. Ignition can come off. And the master switch can come off. Lastly, we'll get the anti-collision light off. And that is the shutdown checklist complete. So as I mentioned, we'll now head back up in the air. We'll just carry out a few quick manoeuvres just to get a bit more of a feel for the aircraft's flight modelling at the more extreme ends of the flight envelope. And then we'll wrap up the review with my overall thoughts and opinions on the aircraft. So welcome back to the cockpit. As you can see, we're now out to the south of Graz airfield. We're around 13,000 feet once again. We're just going to try a stall. First we'll try a power off stall. So coming all the way back on the power. I'll take the gear down just to get rid of the gear warning horn there. And coming back on the stick. Maintaining our altitude, letting the speed bleed off. Okay, got full back stick there now. Speed's still coming back, just coming through 70 knots. And as you can see, the nose does drop, although it's rather reticent to do so. We can more or less hold the nose attitude with full back elevator. So we'll use some elevator trim as well now, just to get the nose up. There goes the stall horn. You can hear the buffeting now. And now we're seeing the buffeting as well. And the nose dropping more aggressively. We'll continue to hold back on the stick. And that rate of descent now much higher. I do have some aileron control, although it's fairly minimal and it does feel like it wants to drop a wing. And if I continue to pull back on the stick, you can see that the aircraft wants to roll to the left, and we will slowly enter into a spin. We'll just let the spin develop a little bit further. So still got full back stick at the moment. Power off and using no rudder currently. So overall the aircraft does spin, although it doesn't really tend to tighten up there very much, as you can see. So releasing the stick. See if the aircraft corrects itself. Doesn't want to, so we'll go fully forward on the stick. A little bit of right rudder there as well. And having to use a ton of trim now to get the nose back down. So overall, pretty good response from the aircraft there. I'm not sure that it's 100% accurate, but it's certainly a big improvement on a lot of the other third-party aircraft that we've seen in the sim. And again, an improvement from the original flight model for the first iteration of the Arrow 3 from Just Flight. Anyway, we'll come up to full power. We'll try a power on stall now. So there's the stall horn once again. Hearing the buffeting, not seeing it visually at the moment. And this time the nose wanting to drop much more aggressively out to the left. Maintaining full back stick, and you can see the spin tightening up really nicely now. So back off the power, going forward on the controls, a little bit of right rudder, and we've corrected. And again, using a ton of trim to get the nose back down. Just try a quick steep turn. Yeah, so overall I have to say the aircraft flight model, I think, really nice. It's certainly one of the better ones in the sim to date, and it seems like Just Flight have done a lot of work since the original flight model from the Arrow 3 that I tried a few months ago. So overall I would say a very decent effort on the flight model. So overall, once again, as I think was pretty clear throughout the review, I think that Just Flight have done a really nice job with the Turbo Arrow 3 and 4 aircraft. I think the product in its own right is well worth picking up, but as we discussed during the preview video, if you do have access to the 66% discount as a result of buying the Arrow 3 previously, then I think that purchasing the Turbo Arrow at really quite a small additional cost is well worth it. Anyway, as usual, we'll break down the aircraft into a little bit more detail, starting with the bad and finishing on the good. I don't really have a whole lot of negative points to bring up about the aircraft, in all honesty. There are certainly still areas of the aircraft that could be improved. For example, we touched on the texturing being slightly lower resolution, particularly on the external model, than perhaps we've seen from some other Microsoft Flight Simulator developers. There is still some room for improvement with the flight model in certain areas. Again, the rudder feels to be a little bit on the sensitive side. And the aircraft still didn't feel spot on when carrying out some of the more extreme manoeuvres, for example the stalls and the spins. That being said, it is worth reiterating that of course any simulated aircraft is never going to be 100% accurate to the real world counterpart, and the Just Flight Turbo Arrow is certainly one of, if not the best aircraft available in the sim currently when it comes to the flight modelling. The aircraft does suffer a little bit of an FPS impact. Overall it worked out to be about 8 FPS less than the default Cessna 152, but overall I think this is pretty reasonable. It's certainly to be expected given that the aircraft is far more complex than a default aircraft within the sim. It is worth mentioning, and you may have noticed it throughout the review, I did experience a little bit of stuttering during the flight, but honestly I can't really say whether this is down to the aircraft or the most recent sim update. I am however much more inclined to put it down to the sim update, as I have noticed a couple of other stability issues since the recent patch. Lastly, and again it's a very minor gripe, but I really would like to see the option to have a custom registration on all of the various liveries available for the aircraft. Overall though, that's really all I have to say in terms of the negative points of the aircraft. I think that Just Flight have done a really remarkable job with the Turbo Arrow 3 and 4. Clearly they've built on what they've learned from developing the previous iteration of the Arrow 3, and the Turbo Arrow is every bit as good, if not better, than the previous version. I really enjoyed my flight out in the aircraft. I think the systems are done to a really nice standard. Again, the flight modelling overall very well done. The sounds are excellent in my opinion. I've never heard a Turbo Arrow in the real world, but it certainly sounds as I would expect. Overall, the modelling of the aircraft is really nice inside and out. The texturing we've already discussed, perhaps could use a little bit of work on the outside, but internally I think the textures are done very nicely. It's really nice to have another aircraft in the sim with a persistent state. That really enhances the whole flying experience. And again, overall it's really nice to have an aircraft with a little bit more performance, both in terms of cruise speed and cruising altitude. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, Just Flight have done a really great job of recreating the ambience of the aircraft. It can often be quite tricky to create an aircraft that feels alive and immersive, but I think that Just Flight have done this really well with the Turbo Arrow, again even better than with the original Arrow. The way the aircraft sounds, the way the aircraft behaves, all of the little touches like the vibration during the engine startup and shutdown, the fact that the engine didn't immediately catch and we had to coax it into life, all of these little touches really go to making the aircraft feel alive, as I say, and for me it really makes it the most immersive aircraft that I've flown in the sim to date. I think it's very easy overall for me to summarise the product. For my money at the moment, the Just Flight Turbo Arrow is the best aircraft available for the sim. It's a very thorough, very well-rounded product. Again, really not too much to fault, and again, really good fun to fly. If you've yet to purchase either of the Arrow aircraft from Just Flight, I highly recommend the turbo version as opposed to the normally aspirated version. Overall, I think figuratively and quite literally you get more bang for your buck. Overall, the Turbo Arrow being the much more capable aircraft, and again, overall I think it's just slightly more refined than the previous iteration of the Arrow from Just Flight. So high praise for the Turbo Arrow from Just Flight, but again, I think the aircraft genuinely deserves it. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below, and I'll always do my best to answer them. But for now, thank you very much, and I'll see you all again soon.